Right, President Cyril Ramaphosa dedicated the most recent edition of his weekly newsletter to highlighting the impact that gender-based violence has on the country. South Africa marks the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence campaign. The global campaign starts this week and brings awareness to an international crisis that needs to be eradicated. Dr. Shaheda Omar is the director at Teddy Bear and Clinic, an NGO for abused children. A very good afternoon to you, Dr. Omar. Thank you so very much for joining us here on SABC News this afternoon.
Good afternoon to you. And indeed, it's a time of shame, it's a time of sadness, it's a time of great tragedy, as our president highlighted the next 5 days of mourning. But during this period of mourning, we are seeing more and more victims who are subjected to the horror of gender-based violence, where systems are still failing our victims, where our victims are subjected to further stigma, humiliation, and trauma. So it is indeed a time of huge shame and grief for many people out there who are victims of gender-based violence. We know South Africa has the highest rate of reported cases of rape. I mean, we're looking at 50,000. Of that, 24,000 are victims of child abuse, sexual abuse committed against children. And we know that 1 in 6 women are killed daily, but of that, 1 in 3 are usually killed by their partners, the intimate partner violence. And our systems, when we look at law enforcement, where we've had mothers come into our clinic today who are actually coming in to celebrate their children who had graduated through interventions, receiving counseling and support, who actually shared their own pain and grief about victims of domestic violence.
Yeah. Dr. Omar, let's talk about the work done by yourselves at the Teddy Bear Clinic. I mean, we get to hear a lot of the kind of work that you are involved with, but really how much of that work is a direct result of the effects of GBV? And of course, I ask this in light of us sort of commemorating 16 days of activism against GBV.
So what we are seeing, and I think more so since the lockdown, where people were trapped, immobilized and shut in their own homes because of being victims of GBV. A lot of mothers and children were victims of violence. So the co-occurrence of domestic violence and child abuse is something that we saw as a trend and a pattern emerging, where mothers, when they reached out to law enforcement, did not receive the kind of support they expected, and then turned to people like Teddy Bear Foundation, and we had to intervene, interject, and respond to the trauma, not only that was inflicted on the child, but also on the mother. And I think that's the kind of support where our focus and core mandate has been children who are victims of abuse, be it physical, sexual, emotional, and neglect. However, in these circumstances, we have had no other a way to address the situation, but reach out to these mothers in distress and who actually require immediate attention and support, and linking them with the relevant resources.
Yeah, you know, I just heard a speaker in one of the dialogues that are currently taking place this afternoon in Parliament. She's a survivor, and she was saying that, you know, systems are not in place to assist those who are victims, those who are abused. And I wonder really how this issue should really be addressed. I mean, since they are speaking in Parliament, you know, how should it really be addressed from a national issue? We can't expect, you know, organizations like your own and NGOs to be the only ones really sort of trying to do something about gender-based violence. We really need to look at it from, you know, the level of government, from a national level. And I wonder what kind of contribution to that conversation you as Teddy Bear Clinic can perhaps give today.
So you've raised something which is very, very important and critical, because I think the planning with the National Strategic Platform on GBV, working with all government stakeholders, has actually been a very valuable plan However, I think the roll down, the cascading of that, the implementation is where the challenges lie, because a lot of new law enforcement officers have been trained, appointed and trained, but what we're finding on the ground is they are not sufficiently or adequately equipped to deal with and manage situations of this nature appropriately. And that is what needs to be addressed, where consultation needs to be done with people on the ground, like to identify civil society organizations, other role players, other key stakeholders on what can be done to improve, but also to get victim participation. And, I think that is key, where the victims give input, and we are getting a lot more of that, of what they haven't received and the lessons to be learned from that, and how best to reach out to ensure that there isn't further trauma or secondary victimization inflicted on these victims.
I'm obviously not an expert on the issues relating to psychology, but I wonder if you've picked up, this is something that I've realized, reporting on the news, that more and more young boys are being abused, whether it is by, a teacher at school or that kind of an instance. And from my little understanding of psychology, one would assume, or I would think, that an abused has the potential to become an abuser. And I hate to kind of victimize a perpetrator of a GBV, but shouldn't we start to focus as well on the issue of young boys and how they are towards women, and the potential of them becoming abusers if they have been abused? I mean, shouldn't there be some sort of focus or involvement really on the men in society?
I love what you're saying. It's music to my ears, because we have already engaged and are embarking on a widespread outreach on engaging with young boys and men, engaging in community dialogues around gender-based violence, because we find that, yes, a lot of these boys have inadequate male role models or inadequate opportunities to identify with a paternal figure. Sometimes they're only present physically and not emotionally connected. And I think they're surrounded by violence, be it domestic violence, a culture of violence, a lot of other adversities where they've had a history of victimization themselves. So, of course, that is the way to go, because the more we engage, the more deeper understanding and insights they develop. I think the greater the opportunity to develop empathy, victim empathy, that this could be their sister, their mother, their friend, and it could be somebody close to them, their own child in the future. So I think this is an absolutely brilliant platform for us to look at the opportunity of disrupting and breaking the cycle of violence, where they adopt a stance of zero tolerance. We've actually put a video clipping on social media, on our websites, where young boys are actually standing up and speaking out and against violence against girls and women, and zero tolerance for that. So absolutely the way to go.
All right. Dr. Omar, it's always a pleasure having you here on SABC News with us. Many thanks to you, and thank you for your contribution to the show.
Thank you.
All right. That's Dr. Shaheda Omar from the Teddy Bear Clinic, doing a lot of work to assist in issues of gender-based violence and assisting very many children in need there.